Hello, my name is Alexis McGivern and I am the Net Zero Standards Manager at Oxford Net Zero, which is an interdisciplinary research group based at the University of Oxford. I'm grateful to have a few minutes of your time today to set the context of your discussion as a citizens jury by introducing the topic of climate change. Let's start with the most fundamental relationship, that between burning fossil fuels and climate change. Fossil fuels, that is coal, oil, and gas, are currently being burned for energy. These non-renewable sources currently supply approximately 80% of the world's energy. The problem is, when they are burned, they release a large amount of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere. Emissions from fossil fuels are the dominant cause of global warming. This graph shows the huge difference between natural cycles of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the last few hundred thousands of years versus the levels we are at now. We currently stand at around 412 parts per million in the atmosphere, so basically 412 parts of carbon dioxide for every million parts of air. And so why does it matter that we have more greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? It matters because of the way that carbon absorbs infrared energy, which traps heat in the atmosphere. There are other important gases that contribute to this greenhouse effect, such as methane. We call this human-induced global warming because it is due to human activity, i.e. the burning of fossil fuels, on the planet. All of this extra heat in the atmosphere throws natural systems into whack, especially those that collect, retain, and unleash water, therefore changing weather patterns so that wet areas become wetter and dry areas become drier. As you may have already seen in the media, this leads to more frequent and severe weather events like storms, floods, droughts, and wildfires. Each of these headlines is just from the last 10 days, and we are seeing increasing numbers of extreme weather events around the world, and devastatingly often in many parts of the world that have contributed very little to historical emissions. In addition to these extreme weather events, climate change also causes sea level rise, biodiversity loss, food insecurity due to a decrease in agricultural output, and loss of life. It's easy to think of climate change as something far off in the future or happening somewhere else, but the truth is it's happening today and in Oxfordshire. By the time you're seeing this video, we will be one day past the hottest day of the year so far, when Oxfordshire will have temperatures higher than Los Angeles, Rio de Janeiro, and Athens. We are also seeing areas of Oxfordshire under risk for flooding in the next 30-odd years. So, what are the main sources of these emissions that are causing climate change? This graph shows that a majority of our emissions come from electricity and heat, but the next most polluting industry is transport. This is why your work at the Citizens Jury is so vital, because you are making decisions for this city that will directly impact a major contribution of our emissions. At the global level, we use temperature targets, almost like a shorthand, to refer to the different severity impacts of climate change. The most significant temperature target that the entire world is working towards at the moment was enshrined in the Paris Agreement in 2015, which was when the world came together to make an agreement to collectively work together to limit the impacts of climate change. The agreement that was made at Paris was to work together to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and aiming for 1.5 degrees Celsius. We compare current global temperature rise against pre-industrial revolution temperatures, which we know from historic records. At our current emission rates, we have been steadily adding 0.2 degrees Celsius to global average temperatures every decade, meaning we could reach 1.5 degrees of warming as early as 2030. We currently are at 1.2 degrees of warming, and it is important to note too that warming is not equal across the planet. In fact, we are seeing the most rapid warming happening in the Arctic, which then creates issue with melting ice leading to sea level rise. However, despite the huge impacts that we are already seeing at 1.2 degrees and how much more devastation we can expect with more warming, there remains a significant gap between commitments made by countries, corporations, and cities and the actual reduction that we have seen in emissions to date. As it stands, with the current pledges, we are heading towards between 2.5 and 2.9 degrees Celsius of warming. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also known as the IPCC, is a group of scientists and experts that assess the state of science on climate change. In a report that they released in 2018, looking at the different scenarios for climate change between a 1.5 and a 2 degree scenario, they found that in order to have a chance to stick to just 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, we must halve our emissions by 2030. To put that in context, during the pandemic, we saw a drop of 7% in our emissions, and we saw just how disruptive that was to the world economy and to people. The half a degree of warming between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees Celsius matters a lot. Here are some different scenarios under different temperature realities. In a 1.5 degrees scenario, the average drought will last 2 months. That doubles when we get to 2 degrees scenario, and it goes to 10 months in a 3 degrees scenario. These are figures from the UNFCCC, which stands for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the global agreement that Paris sits under. To take a more focused European example closer to home, a 1.5 degree scenario will see around a 41% increase in the average area burned by wildfires in an average Mediterranean summer. That goes up to an increase of 62% in a 2 degree scenario and a 97% increase in the area covered by wildfires in a 3 degree scenario. So while these temperature changes can feel small, they translate into very serious outcomes. Cities and towns will need to contribute to global climate goals. While at the UK government level there has been commitment to international goals, and there are national level goals that are enshrined through the carbon budgets that were introduced in this country in 2008, we are severely lagging behind on our ambition. Given that 55% of the global population live in cities, and cities produce 75% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, it's a really great way to implement emissions savings plans that can inspire other actors in the system. My last piece of advice as you go forward is to remember to ground your suggestions in climate justice. A greener future that isn't inclusive isn't a better future. Environmentalists don't just care about plants and animals that you may never see. It's really at its core about fairness and well-being for people all around the world. When it comes to transport policy, for example, we need to ensure that greener policies don't unfairly disadvantage people who move differently, such as disabled people. We need to recognize that green policies also need to be fairly applied between members of the cities, so it's not just disadvantageous to the people who live outside of the city centre. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that this important work in the Citizens' Jury, during this important work in the Citizens' Jury, you will remember 3 key statistics from this presentation. 80%, which is the amount of our energy that is currently being met by fossil fuels at the moment, which is causing impacts on the Earth system affecting people, plants, and animals. We have already reached 1.2 degrees Celsius of warming, and every small degree of warming makes a difference in our survival and in the severity of impacts that we will see. Finally, we must endeavour to slash our emissions in half by 2030 to have a fighting chance to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and good luck with your Citizens' Jury. Thank you.